What if the biggest risk in our food systems aren't the ones we're talking about, and the things that we fear most in our food aren't the most dangerous? Hi, I'm Marianne Smith Edge, and welcome back to Rooted and Restless. Today I'm talking to a colleague, friend, and an international economist who literally could talk about everything around the world, but we're going to focus in on ag economy and actually talking about some of the food risks. Today with me is Dr. Robert Thompson, or Bob, as most people know, a trained international economist who has spanned his career from academics to government and nonprofits. Dr. Thompson was the dean at the College of Agriculture at Purdue University. He worked as a senior economist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and was CEO of a Rockefeller nonprofit, as well as being director of rural development for the World Bank. When we say Bob knows the world, he literally has, as he's done research in over 90 countries across the world. So if I want an expert to talk about economics, I can't think of a better person. But what is most of his title that I most admire, and how we first connected when I worked in Washington, D.C., as he was on an advisory board for the organization in which I worked, is that we do have something in common. We both grew up on a small dairy farm, he in northern New York, and of course, I in Kentucky. So, Bob, it's amazing how a small dairy farm boy can ruled the world, basically, and been across the world. So obviously your dairy roots definitely had some influence as you have looked at ag economy over the years.
Oh, good morning, Marianne, and I'm delighted to join you in your program this morning. Yes, growing up in a dairy farm certainly teaches a work ethic. It exposes you to many, many parts of the food and agricultural system. And I have to mention that my parents had a deep commitment to education. I'm the oldest of 10 children, six boys and four girls. And my folks saw the 10 of us kids through 56 years of college. That was 50 cows. So I always have to take my hat off to them for the priority they put on education.
Well, Bob, with your background and all that you've done, I wanted to first kind of address a situation that last week on the podcast we were talking about the farm situation with one of the friend of mine and a local Kentucky farmer, and not to belabor the issue, but it is a reality. And in fact, with your economics background, you were one of the signers on a letter probably a couple months ago that really talked about American agriculture in crisis. So I think from your perspective, is it really more of a crisis than it has been in cycles? We all know, growing up on a farm and owning farmland, that crises do go in cycles, but are we looking at something a little more dramatic than what we previously have experienced throughout history?
Well, what is particularly problematical right now is the extent to which we've lost the world market due to reactions against some of the negative trade policies that we've put in place. American agriculture is probably the most productive food producing machine in the world, and we have the capacity to produce far more food than we consume. And as a result, we need the export market, and the export market needs us. We have one of the three most fertile soils resources on the planet, along with Argentina and Ukraine. And we have a great comparative advantage in agriculture built based on both our natural resources as well as the cumulative investments that we've made in agriculture research and technology development in both the public and private sectors. So we have this huge productive capacity. But we export about a third of what we produce, or certainly a quarter, and much of agriculture. And so we need that export market, but yet with slamming tariffs on other countries, they've retaliated against our agriculture products. And for example, China was our biggest soybean market, and we in effect gave that market to Brazil as a result of the retaliation against the tariffs that were put in place during President Trump's first term. So prices are low, and with the tariffs that have been slammed on inputs of agricultural products like chemicals and fertilizers, um, our costs are up, prices are down, and particularly our crop sector is suffering severely right now. And in the relative to the long haul, I'm really worried about cutting back on investments in agriculture research in both our land grant universities as well as USDA.
Well, I agree with you. It is serious, but sometimes, a consumer or someone's listing that's not in the ag world might say, that's tough for farmers, but does that really affect me? And I know there is a trickle down effect, but as an economist, I'd like to hear your viewpoint.
Well, agriculture or food as we know it in the supermarket is not only the raw product produced on the farm, but it undergoes a lot of processing and packaging and value added before it gets to the supermarket. And so the price of food at the supermarket is over 50% labor services added to the product after it left the farm gate. But what's hitting food prices right now extra hard is transport costs. Diesel costs have skyrocketed in the last month because of the war in Iran. And as a result, you've had the effect of just inflationary tendencies pushing up food prices in the last couple of years. But now we've got the extra push coming from the price of diesel and the cost of transportation.
So the reality is, in the current situation, we're probably not going to see food costs going, quote, down anytime soon.
No, the best we can hope for is for the rate of inflation to slow down, but not the absolute cost. Now, that doesn't mean that some prices won't be up and down. For example, the price of eggs got pushed way sky high a year or so ago because of the avian or the uh, influenza, and as a result, we had a huge loss in the size of our laying flock nationwide. That's come back. But that's directly a supply and demand issue on the with eggs, and so eggs have come down again. Meat prices are sky high because we have fewer cattle on feed right now than we had in 1950. That's 75 years ago since we've had such a small stock of cattle in on feed. Now, what that means is if we want to rebuild that supply of beef in the future, we've got to retain females from slaughter now. But that means that we squeeze the market even more in the short term in order to breed cows to have calves that will eventually be slaughtered a couple of years out.
And I'm hearing from beef farmers at this point, it's it's that old what's that money in hand means something to them at this point sometimes. So, as you said, keeping those female beef, it becomes a little more risky at times, or not an automatic situation.
That's absolutely right. And And we've also had the complication of drought reducing the size of pastures. It's got cattle people have gotten to both sides, but they've enjoyed pretty high prices as a result of the tight supply of beef.
So we've already created some concern if consumers are listening. The fact that food costs, unfortunately, are probably going to stay where they are at this point, as you mentioned. But I think, and that hits the headlines. But also, we also know that kind of to add on to some of the economics aspect is that a lot of times headlines about the safety of our food hits headlines, and my concern as well as yours is working in the food supply. Yes, we need to be concerned about food safety, but the reality sometimes those reports that come out create more fear and guilt than, and perhaps doesn't really put in perspective. And one of those is the annual Environmental Working Group Dirty Dozen about fruits and vegetables. And you and I have talked about it, and I think this is where it's easy to see what not to eat, or the fact that we should only buy organic versus conventional, and it's because of the pesticide issue. But really comes down to what we would consider a hazard versus a risk. And I can't think of someone better than yourself that's really looked at food supply across the globe to kind of first set the stage on what do we mean by hazard and risk.
Well, hazard is a potential problem, like is something carcinogenic or toxic at some level. But when we talk about toxicity, we often forget the old maximum that toxicity is a function of dose. And I love the example that Professor Bruce Ames of Berkeley, who invented the Ames test for carcinogenicity, and he likes to cite the example that there are 17 carcinogens in a cup of coffee, but yet we don't ban drinking coffee. Because those carcinogens are present at such minuscule amounts that, as he says, drinking coffee for a whole year is never going to cause a problem because your exposure is so small. So we have to differentiate between risk and hazard. The hazard is the fact that there's 17 carcinogens in a cup of coffee, but the risk is minuscule because they're there in such small quantities. We have the capacity today to measure infinitesimally small parts per trillion, not parts per billion, but parts per trillion, and detect the presence. But if you don't have much of that, if you don't have enough to make a difference, it doesn't matter. It's not dangerous. And so the sad thing about the environmental working groups, Dirty Dozen, is they scare people away from eating fresh fruits and vegetables because they say they found this infinitesimally small amount of some pesticide that not that's and they label it chemical. If it's chemical, it's dangerous. And again, toxicity is a function of the dose, and unless you have a significant concentration, it's not a problem. And so and in fact, Professor Ames has said that the probability of getting cancer from drinking coffee in a year is far higher than the possible amount of pesticide residues that you would consume from a year's eating fresh fruits and vegetables, because and in fact he says that you're more likely to get cancer from not eating enough fruits and vegetables than you are from any risk of pesticides. So uh, there's a lot of fear mongering out there to scare people unduly about the safety of our food supply. We really do have the safest food supply that there has ever been had.
And Bob, when you talked about the fact of being able to measure, I remember being in meetings when I was in DC over 10 years ago, and with a group of toxicologists. And that was one of the concerns, was that we were getting so much better to measure the most minute levels of chemicals, which can be good, but as you just said, there was concern, how is that going to be communicated, and how do we communicate it in a way to not create that fear? And as I concur with Dr. Ames, as a registered dietitian, we know the reality is we're not even eating enough fruits and vegetables to be concerned, and we definitely, our health can be benefited by more. I think one of the things in that particular, the EWG, as well as in general, is that concern about pesticides or chemicals on, quote, conventional food versus organic. And I would say that a certain type of pesticide is used across the board, because in reality, we both grew up on a farm. You just can't throw seed in the ground without any additional nutrients or keeping the pest away, and expect it to grow and produce perfect fruit.
That's right. The genetics in the seed determine the potential productivity, or the potential amount of crop, but you have to feed it well with enough fertilizer, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium from some combination of chemical and organic fertilizers. But then once you have that potential yield, then you've got all the detractors that you have to control: the insects, the plant diseases, the competition from weeds for nutrients and sunlight and space. And so as a result, we have modern agriculture is so productive because we have a system of very good genetics as a result of our investments in plant breeding, and especially modern biotechnology now, and together with weed control, insect control, plant disease control media that are demonstrated to be safe. And both the USDA and the EPA are extremely concerned about the testing that's done before any chemical is used, and they establish what the safe levels of use are, and then they apply a risk factor and only allow a small fraction of that allowable amount. And as a result, we have no need to be fearful about the safety of our food supply.
Now, let's hear from Mindy Herman, registered dietitian, food and nutrition writer, and a guru on all the latest food trends.
Hi, Marianne. Happy Earth Month and Earth Day. The first Earth Day was 56 years ago on April 22, 1970, as a nationwide environmental teach-in day. Do you remember where you were on the first Earth Day? I remember. I was on a class field trip at the Griffith Park Zoo in Los Angeles. I think we were too young to understand Earth Day. You may be surprised to learn that the United Auto Workers was the biggest supporter of the first Earth Day. Today, Earth Day is celebrated around the world by more than 1 billion people as an opportunity to take action and protect the future of our planet. This year's Earth Day theme is Our Power, Our Planet, with activities running from April 18th through Earth Day on April 22nd. Activities across the U.S. include community cleanups, teach-ins, peaceful demonstrations, tree planting, voter registration, town hall meetings, and community organizing. And remember that small actions can lead to big changes.
Now, let's return to our conversation. So that raises the question, we can say we shouldn't be concerned, and I'm agreeing, but we know the recent headlines about what constitutes making our foods healthy, making us healthy again. And one of those questions really comes out is that the use of glyphosate. And you and I don't have any, quote, dog in the fight in this particular area aspect, other than understanding the science of it. But when people talk about whether or not farmers should have access to glyphosate, and suddenly everybody's talking about it, whether they understand it or not. When we look at it from the economics, as you just talked about, as well as a safe food supply, how do you respond to that?
Well, the first point about glyphosate is in many ways, glyphosate was a miracle herbicide. It breaks a biochemical pathway in the development of plants that doesn't exist in humans or in any animals. So first, the beauty of glyphosate is it works on a the reason it's so effective is it works on something that exists only in plants and not in the animal kingdom. So that's the basic biochemistry of it. Why it was such a miraculous herbicide that it works so well and is safe. Uh, but the an important point about glyphosate is that it enables low-till agriculture or zero-till agriculture. We know that plowing and working up the soil it causes moisture loss. It causes loss of soil organic matter, and it's really a lot more efficient and environmentally beneficial if you can control the weeds and but not have to plow or cultivate the land. So economically, glyphosate was a great game changer. Environmentally, it was also highly beneficial because it enabled low-till agriculture, and uh, uh, and it's inherently safe because uh, it only affects something that's known in the plant kingdom as opposed to the animal kingdom.
Well, and I think also, listening to um, Jesse Horn that was on the podcast last week, as well as other farmers and being involved, is that we've just as farmers, we've got much more. We have more technology, so we can be so much smarter about using things like glyphosate because it's precision. You're only going to spray where it needs to be.
Exactly, and in precision agriculture is uh, is so important because one any pesticide we use costs money. And so the least we can use is good economics, but it's also good environmental practice. So it's a win-win in that situation that we have the capacity now through using electronic sensors to only target only target the weeds or only target the exactly what we need to control the certain insects or weeds and so it's amazing what automation and precision agriculture is now enabling. When you combine that with modern biotechnology and the ability to breed into plants natural resistance to both insects as well as plant diseases, uh, then modern agriculture is a technological wonder that is, and really we're in the golden age of the biological sciences today in both human health, medicine, as well as in food production. And frankly, I think of health as the product of two things. It's a good nutritional status, and it's the absence of diseases caused by pathogens. And so uh, in this case, the modern biological sciences is enabling tremendous progress in both spheres.
So the reality is, where technology, as you just said, is not only we accept it and celebrate that it has improved our health, but also we need to think about celebrating how it's improved the health of the food we actually eat. And
Oh, that's absolutely right. And plant diseases are a real thing. And If you have a sick plant, it's if it even survives, it's not going to produce nearly as much food. So healthy plants and healthy people.
Well, and you talked about food supply, and you and I have mentioned because we know from the ag community we always talk about is that we have to produce enough food to feed the world. But I think sometimes that message has gotten lost because, at the end of the day, if I'm not working with a world population and I can go to the grocery store and I can buy what I need, we tend not to maybe have that broad perspective that it really matters. And I mentioned to you last week I heard Michael Grunwald, who is just work as a writer in New York Times, and he just wrote a book that we are eating our planet. And I'll just say one of the message he says: the biggest climate problem we're overlooking is land use for food, and unless we produce more food with less land, we will keep destroying the ecosystems that stabilize the climate. And I've heard you and read a lot of things because you really focus on that, less land, more food concept. So, love to hear your perspective on that statement.
Oh yeah, if we hadn't had the productivity increases we've had since the Green Revolution of the 1960s, we would have destroyed much more of the world's forest than we have to this point. So we have to think of the productivity increases we've had in agriculture as protecting the forested areas. Because remember that the world's population has been in a period of very rapid growth in the last several decades. We've now passed 8 billion people. We're now expected to max out at probably just shy of 10 billion by maybe 2075 or 2080. But and Western Europe is not reproducing itself. Its population is actually declining. Population of China is declining now. The U.S. Our birth rate is not enough to maintain our current population without immigration. But where the population is still growing rapidly is sub-Saharan Africa. Uh, it's the one region of the world whose population is expected to double between now and uh, its peak. So we'll have an additional billion people to feed in sub-Saharan Africa. South Asia, population growth is slowing down, but you've got India, Pakistan, Bangladesh there, and they're also projected to add about three-quarters of a billion people. Now, their agriculture's done reasonably well. They invest a lot in agricultural research, but sub-Saharan Africa's agriculture is what's underperformed. They're net food importers today. They could be doing a lot better, but they've underinvested in research. Um, so, yes, we have abundant food produced in the world today. We have good export markets from the U.S., from Ukraine, from Brazil and Argentina to help feed the parts of the world that don't have a comparative advantage in agriculture. But we're far from out of the woods. We have to feed uh, a, about 1.75 billion or 1.75 billion people more before we get to the maximum global population.
So when we think of that, is that how can what do you see as the U.S. role in making sure that we have enough food to feed the world?
Well, the U.S. most important contribution is research. We have been generous in our foreign aid programs in the past in supporting international agriculture research. Um, but so we have a very important role to play in being sure that the adaptive research is done to be sure that within every agroecosystem, we can make use of the tools of modern agriculture to increase productivity. That also reduces poverty. The bulk of the people in those countries are still in agriculture. It's a natural part of economic development that the fraction of the population engaged in producing food does decline over time as the manufacturing and services sectors grow. So, but the U.S. has also got an important role to play in exporting food to countries that need or that simply don't have the comparative advantage. Think about the dry countries of the Middle East and North Africa. Um, Saudi Arabia once tried to become self-sufficient in wheat production by paying its farmers 10 times the world market price of wheat to get them to use irrigation technology. But they ended up creating an environmental disaster as well as overusing their water resource in a terribly wasteful way. And when they could buy the wheat on the world market for 1/10 of what they were paying their farmers. No sense, bad economics, bad environmental practice, and the US, Brazil, Ukraine, Argentina, we will be important agricultural exporters well into the future.
Well, I think, Bob, you've given us a good perspective is that, one, I think sometimes when people say, I'm just going to live in my bubble, the fact is, when we talk about food and food production, we can't live within our own bubble. It is a global bubble that we all need to be aware of.
Absolutely.
And with that, so what are your final thoughts on I guess what should keep us up at night in regards to our food supply, or what should make us rest better? Perhaps is another way to look at it.
Okay, my biggest fear for our global food supply is that activists who oppose modern agricultural science, who fear biotechnology, who have promote chemophobia, just fear of any chemicals, labeling them as toxic without any regard for their real toxicity. Uh, that those activists who have been very successful, by the way, in sub-Saharan Africa in poisoning the well towards modern agricultural science, that they will impede our ability to use all the tools of modern science to feed the world better than today at lower cost without destroying the environment. If we don't raise productivity and have that growing demand for food, we will destroy many more of the world's forests. We know the forests are the world's lungs. They convert CO2 into oxygen, so they're essential. As CO2 concentrations go up, we have global warming. We know that all agroecosystems are migrating, but it's going to take more agriculture research just to sustain present productivity levels in those areas undergoing climate change. We've seen here in North America how all agroecosystems have been sliding north as we grow the same crops few hundred miles further north than we used to. And it's the world is changing with as a result of that. And so agriculture can contribute to slowing down global warming. But if we really want to accelerate global warming, we should destroy all the world's forests because then we would not have nearly as much capacity to convert CO2 into oxygen. So my long-term fear is underinvestment in research and unwillingness to adopt and use the tools of modern biology. When we're in the golden age of the biological sciences, it would be tragic to fail to use those tools that are right there at our disposal.
Well, thank you so much for your insights, because I think it's so important to put some knowledge and common sense into thinking about the reality of if we want the same food supply today as tomorrow, we know things have to change to and adapt to the world around us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Bob. It was truly a pleasure. We could talk for hours, and I always appreciate all the information that you still publish and post and send to me, because you truly are a wealth and world of information, and bring such insight to thinking about how we look at the economics of food, from cost to also to how we grow food. But I think what's so important is we need to realize is that with research, we've learned to become better producers of food and actually produce it in a more safe way. So in all reality, we do have a safe food supply. And again, think about the fact that the risks that we sometimes, what we think are most dangerous probably are not. So thank you again, Bob.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening, Rooted and Restless. It's all about digging deeper into the behind the scenes about food, agriculture, and nutrition, because after all, every food has a story, and sometimes it's not as simple as it seems. Subscribe to Rooted and Restless wherever you listen to podcasts, or find us on YouTube.